talk about the beautiful business of milk today. Yeah, yeah. I got milk. Let's talk about milk. Oh yeah, baby, let's talk about the beautiful business of milk today.
This episode of Got Milk is sponsored by Shunya Agritech, the folks revolutionizing cattle nutrition with hydroponic green fodder. Visit their website at shunya.live for more details, or download the Shunya app from Play Store or App Store.
All right, let's dive in. Today we're looking at how to, well, grow enough food for livestock, especially, when the land and water aren't exactly perfect.
Yeah, definitely a real-world challenge. We're talking fodder crops, those plants that feed the animals that ultimately feed us. But there's a twist here. We're going to explore how these crops can actually grow in some pretty tough conditions.
Right, because not every farm has like that picture-perfect soil. Right?
Absolutely.
So for this deep dive, we're using a research article. It's called Studies on Performance of Fodder Crops in Problematic Soils and Water. And it was published in the Pharma Innovation Journal.
Interesting title, right?
Yeah. Get ready to get into some serious science here.
We'll break it down. Don't worry. This research is really important because it's looking at solutions for, areas that are dealing with high salt levels in the soil and even the water.
Before we get too deep into it, can you remind us why fodder is so important in the first place?
Well, try to imagine a world without, milk or cheese or meat, even leather. That's what a shortage of fodder could lead to, because it's the basis of livestock and dairy production, which are, vital for food security, economic stability, especially in rural communities.
Okay, so pretty essential stuff then. Now this study, it really focuses on a specific field in India, right? What's so special about that particular field?
Well, this field is a perfect example of those problematic soils that we mentioned. It's in a village called Mavanamvari Palim. And the soil there has a high pH level, high salinity, and sodicity. Oh, and by the way, even the water they use for irrigation, it's saline too. So it's a tough situation for plants.
Wait, high salinity, doesn't salt hurt plants?
It does. Imagine you're a plant, right? And you're trying to drink water. But the water around you is super salty. It makes it way harder to get the water you need, And that's basically what's happening to these plants. They're dealing with what scientists call osmotic stress, and it can really stunt their growth.
Ah, okay.
Yep.
That makes sense. And then there's sodicity. Honestly, sounds a bit intimidating. What does that actually mean?
So sodicity is about the balance of different salts in the soil. And having too much sodium, well, it can really mess with a plant's ability to absorb other nutrients.
So it's not just a water shortage, but also a nutrient imbalance.
Exactly. But here's where things get interesting. The researchers wanted to see which plants could handle this tough environment. So they tested 7 different fodder crops in that field.
Oh, so it's like a fodder crop competition. Who are the contestants in this plant showdown?
We've got some familiar ones like cowpea, stylo, hedge lucerne, and alfalfa. And then we've got some maybe less well-known ones. CoFS-29, Panthchari-6, and sweet Sudan grass.
Sweet Sudan grass, huh? That's got to be a win.
Well, maybe your instincts are right. The study found that sweet Sudan grass actually had the highest biomass yield. CoFS-29 and Panthchari-6 were close behind, and poor stylo, well, it came in last.
So sweet Sudan grass is a real contender in tough conditions then.
Mm-hmm.
But why? What makes it able to thrive where other plants struggle?
That's the big question, right? And this study, it focuses more on the results, the what's, not so much the why. They do mention some research on salt tolerance in sorghum, which is related to sweet Sudan grass, but it seems like there's still a lot to learn about, like the specific ways these plants are so tough.
So a bit of a mystery still. But besides just how much they yield, did the study look at anything else? Like how easily these crops germinate and establish themselves? Seems like that'd be super important in a harsh environment, right?
Oh, absolutely. You could have the highest yielding crop in the world, but if it can't even get its roots down properly, it's useless.
Right.
And that's where those top performers really shined. Panthchari-6, CoFS-29, and sweet Sudan grass, they all had a 100% germination and establishment rate. No problem getting started for these guys.
That's impressive. So knowing this would be huge for farmers facing similar challenges. It's not just about the harvest at the end. It's about choosing crops that can get going and thrive right from the start.
Exactly. The study even included a picture of the field in Havanamvari. You can really see the difference between the winners and, well, the crops that were struggling.
It's like a visual reminder of how tough it can be for farmers in these regions. And speaking of challenges, can we zoom out a bit? Where else are we seeing these kinds of soil problems, and why should we care?
You know, this isn't just a local problem. Rising sea levels and even some agricultural practices like shrimp farming can lead to more salinity in coastal areas globally.
So it's not just a few isolated places. This could be a growing problem, affecting more and more farmers, maybe even threatening the food supply in those areas.
You got it. And that's why research like this is so important. It's about finding solutions that aren't just scientifically sound, but also, things that can be applied in different regions. This reminds me of a company called Shunya. They're doing some really interesting things with fodder production.
Okay, now I'm curious. Tell me more about this Shunya company. What makes them stand out?
Well, they've developed what they call a fodder as a service model. It's like having a fresh salad bar delivered straight to your farm, but for your cows.
Okay, that's an image.
Hmm.
So how does this fodder as a service actually work?
They set up these like modular units right on the farm, climate controlled. Think of them as mini fodder factories. They churn out fresh green fodder every single day, and they use a hydroponic system.
Hydroponics. So no soil involved. They're growing the fodder just in water. That's pretty clever. No more battling those problematic soils.
Exactly. And because they have this controlled environment, Shunya can optimize everything.
Yeah.
Temperature, light, nutrients, you name it. It's all about maximum growth and the best possible nutritional content.
I bet the cows are loving that. But seriously, this sounds like a real solution for farmers dealing with those salty soils. No more worrying about whether the crops will take root or if they'll get a good yield. They just get a consistent supply of fresh, high-quality fodder.
It's a pretty impressive model, I'd say. And what's even cooler is that it's sustainable in so many ways. Hydroponics uses way less water than traditional farming, and they even recycle the water within the system.
So it's good for the farmer, good for the environment. This Shunya model sounds like a real game changer.
It really does. It shows what's possible when we use innovative thinking and technology to address these big challenges in agriculture.
It's like a breath of fresh air, for the future of food production.
Yeah, definitely. But speaking of fresh air, have you ever thought about how our food choices, like what we choose to eat, impact the environment?
Oh, that's a whole other topic. Maybe we could do a deep dive on that sometime.
We definitely should. But for now, let's switch gears a little. Let's talk about the environmental impact of, well, the traditional way we produce fodder, especially when it comes to how we use land.
Okay, let's get into that. We all know land is a valuable resource, and agriculture plays a huge role in how we use it. What are some of the concerns when we're talking about growing fodder crops?
Well, producing fodder the traditional way often needs a lot of land, and that can lead to deforestation, habitat loss. Plus, it's land that could be used for other things, like growing food for people.
So it's a balancing act. We need enough fodder for the livestock, but we also need to protect the environment and make sure there's enough land for everything else.
Exactly. And this is where those innovative solutions, like what Shunya is doing with their fodder as a service, become even more interesting.
Right, because by growing fodder hydroponically in a controlled environment, they're using way less land than traditional farming. It's like shrinking the farm down, but without sacrificing how much they produce.
Exactly. It's about getting the most out of the resources we have and minimizing our impact on the environment. And it speaks to a bigger point about, sustainability in agriculture. It's not just about what we grow, it's about how we grow it.
It's about making choices that are good for both people and the planet.
Absolutely. And speaking of choices, this research raises a good question for our listeners. What would the ultimate sustainable fodder production system look like to you?
Ooh, I love that. Let's challenge our listeners to think big. If you could design the perfect system, what technologies would you use? What environmental factors would be most important? And how would you make sure it's accessible and helpful for farmers and communities all over the world?
It's a great question to leave everyone with. It's about thinking creatively, imagining a future where food production is, both plentiful and sustainable. Who knows, maybe one of our listeners will be the one to make that future a reality.
It's an exciting challenge, for sure. And it's amazing to see so much innovation happening in agriculture. But before we get too lost in futuristic farms, can we circle back to those winning fodder crops? I mean, we talked about how much they yield, how tough they are, how well they get started. But what about the nutritional value? These are meant to be food for animals, right?
That's a great point. It's not just about quantity, it's got to be quality too, right? Different crops have different nutrients, so farmers need to make sure their animals are getting the right balance of, protein, energy, all those good things.
It's like making sure your kids eat their veggies. But on a farm scale, did the study say anything about the nutritional content of these salt-tolerant champs?
Well, this study didn't really get into the nitty-gritty of the nutrition breakdown, but, in the real world, that's something you definitely have to consider.
For sure. And I'm guessing there are other practical things farmers would think about too, right? Like how much water a crop needs or if it needs special fertilizers, even how easy it is to harvest.
Oh, absolutely. Things like drought tolerance, are there pests that bother it, even how easy it is to harvest, all that plays a role. Farmers have to find a balance. What's good for the animals, what makes sense financially, and what's sustainable in the long term.
Sounds like there's more to picking the right fodder crop than you might think.
Yeah, it's kind of like a puzzle. All the pieces got to fit together. And let's not forget, the most important judges of all, the animals themselves.
You mean the cows have a say in this too?
Absolutely. It's something we often forget about. But palatability matters. If the cow doesn't like the taste of something, it's not going to eat it, no matter how nutritious it is.
So it's not enough to find a crop that can handle tough conditions and has all the right nutrients. It's got to taste good to the cows too. That's a tall order.
It is. The goal is to find what works best for everyone involved, the animals and the environment. And that's why research like this is so helpful. It helps us see what the possibilities are and understand, what the trade-offs might be.
It's a constant search for that super crop, high yield, resilient, nutritious, and of course, tasty for the cows.
That's the dream. And speaking of dreams, let's go back to that Shunya company for a minute. That fodder as a service model. We talked about how it could help with water and land use. But what about the quality of the fodder itself? Can something grown hydroponically be as nutritious as, something grown in a field?
That's a great question. Because with hydroponics, it's all about controlling the environment, right? So does that mean you can actually tweak the nutritional content, make it exactly what you need?
Exactly. That's one of the coolest things about this technology. By adjusting the nutrient solution in the hydroponic system, Shunya can basically dial in the right levels of protein, vitamins, minerals, whatever they want.
It's like a custom menu for cows.
Yeah.
You could cater to different breeds, ages, even what you're trying to produce. That's incredible.
It really is. And it's not just about meeting those basic nutritional needs. There's research that suggests hydroponic fodder can actually be more nutritious in some ways than field-grown crops.
Quite really more nutritious.
Yeah. Some studies have found, for example, that hydroponic fodder can have higher levels of antioxidants and more digestible protein.
So it's possible that this hydroponic fodder is actually better for the cows than what they'd eat out in a pasture.
That's what some of the research is saying. Of course, you always need more research to be sure, but it's a good sign. And then there's the freshness factor. This fodder is literally harvested and given to the cows within hours. So it keeps all those good nutrients that can get lost, during transportation and storage and all that.
All right, I'm sold. Where's my cow salad bar?
Right. And it's not just the nutrition. Hydroponically grown fodder is also free of pesticides and herbicides, which can be a problem with traditional farming.
So good for the cows, good for the farmers, good for the environment. I'm telling you, this Shunya company is doing something really special.
I agree. It's part of a bigger trend, I think, this kind of innovation and disruption in agriculture.
Disruption can be a good thing, right? When it leads to better, more sustainable ways of doing things.
Absolutely. And it's not just about fancy high-tech solutions like hydroponics either. There's so much happening around the world, from small farms trying out regenerative practices to scientists working on crops that can handle drought.
It's like everyone's realizing the challenges and the possibilities in agriculture today. Makes you wonder what other amazing things are just around the corner.
That's a great question. And it makes me think of something that often gets overlooked: the social and economic impact of all these innovations.
Right, because agriculture isn't just about plants and animals. It's about people, livelihoods, communities.
Exactly. So when we're looking at all these new technologies and approaches, we have to think about how they'll affect farmers, rural communities, consumers, everyone involved.
It's about making sure these innovations benefit everyone, not just a select few.
Absolutely. And speaking of benefits, let's take a moment to appreciate just how amazing the plant world is. We've been talking about a few specific fodder crops today, but there are so many plants out there with incredible properties and potential.
It's like a whole treasure chest of botanical wonders just waiting to be explored.
It really is. That's what makes research and innovation in agriculture so exciting. There's always something new to discover, something new to learn.
It's a never-ending journey of unlocking the secrets of nature and using those secrets to create a more sustainable and nourishing world.
And as we continue that journey, it's important to remember the value of biodiversity and the knowledge that's been passed down through generations of farmers.
Right. It's not about replacing everything with high-tech solutions. It's about finding a balance between innovation and tradition, modern science, and the wisdom of, the people who have been working the land for centuries.
Well said. It's about understanding that everything in our food systems is connected and that every choice we make has an impact.
This deep dive has really got me thinking about the food I eat and the choices I make as a consumer.
Me too. And I hope our listeners feel the same way. The more we understand about where our food comes from and the challenges of producing it sustainably, the better choices we can make.
It's about becoming more aware of our impact, supporting sustainable practices, and speaking up for policies that promote a healthy and fair food system for everyone.
And sometimes it's just about taking a moment to appreciate the incredible role that plants play in sustaining life on Earth.
Well said. But before we get too philosophical, let's switch gears one last time and talk about something a bit more concrete, the environmental impact of livestock production.
That's a crucial topic because agriculture, and that includes raising livestock, has a big impact on our planet.
Absolutely. And when we're talking about fodder crops, one of the main concerns is the environmental footprint of, how we traditionally grow them.
That's right. We've talked about land use and water consumption, but there's another piece to the puzzle: greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay, let's talk about emissions. How does producing fodder contribute to climate change?
Well, there are a few key factors. One is the production of synthetic fertilizers. Those are often used in conventional agriculture to boost yields, but they release a lot of nitrous oxide, which is a potent greenhouse gas.
So the fertilizers that are supposed to help us grow more food are actually contributing to global warming. That's ironic.
It is. It really highlights the need to find more sustainable alternatives, things like organic fertilizers or regenerative practices that focus on building healthy soil so you don't need as many external inputs.
Makes sense. And what about the cows themselves? Don't they produce methane, which is another greenhouse gas?
Exactly. Cows and other ruminant animals release methane as part of their digestion. And while methane doesn't stay in the atmosphere as long as carbon dioxide, it's much better at trapping heat.
So feeding cows contributes to climate change in two ways: through the production of the fodder, and then through the methane the cows release.
That's the reality of livestock production, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not all bad news. There are some promising solutions emerging that could help reduce those impacts.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are some of those solutions, and how do they relate to fodder?
Well, remember how we talked about Shunya's fodder as a service model using hydroponics?
The cow salad bar.
That's the one. It turns out that this approach could also have a positive impact on greenhouse gas emissions.
Really? How so?
Because they're growing the fodder hydroponically in a controlled environment, they don't need synthetic fertilizers and they use a lot less water. Both of those things contribute to greenhouse gases in traditional farming.
So less fertilizer, less water, less impact on the climate. Sounds like a win-win-win.
Exactly. And some researchers even think that hydroponic fodder could help reduce methane emissions from cows.
Wait, what? What a cow eats affects how much methane it produces.
That's right. It all comes down to the microbes in their rumen. That's where methane is produced. And studies have shown that feeding cows fresh, high-quality fodder, like the kind Shunya produces, can actually lead to lower methane emissions.
So by changing what we feed cows, we could actually reduce their environmental impact. That's amazing.
It really is, and it just shows how interconnected our food systems are. What we grow, how we grow it, what we feed our animals, it all affects the health of our planet.
It's a good reminder that we all have a role to play in creating a more sustainable future. And sometimes the best solutions are right there in front of us, just waiting to be discovered.
And speaking of discoveries, let's take a step back for a minute and acknowledge the incredible ingenuity of nature itself.
I'm always up for a bit of nature's wisdom. What do you mean?
Well, we've been talking about human innovations in agriculture, but plants themselves are incredible innovators. Over millions of years, they've figured out how to survive and thrive in all kinds of challenging environments.
That's so true. From those giant redwood trees to tiny wildflowers growing through cracks in the sidewalk, plants have adapted to so many different conditions.
Exactly. And that resilience, that ability to adapt, is something we can learn from.
It's like nature is giving us a blueprint for sustainable living. We just need to pay attention and learn from it.
And that's a perfect segue to our final part of this deep dive. Let's explore some of the specific lessons we can learn from plants and how we can use those lessons to create a more sustainable future for agriculture and for everything else.
I love that idea. It's like plants are giving us a master class in, how to be tough and resourceful. What are some of the biggest lessons we can learn from these green gurus?
Well, I think one of the most obvious ones is diversity. Think about a natural ecosystem, right? It thrives on having all these different plant species, each one with its own strengths and weaknesses.
Right, it's like a diversified portfolio, but for nature. If one thing struggles, there's something else to pick up the slack.
Exactly. And that same idea applies to agriculture. If you just rely on one single crop, you're more vulnerable to pests, diseases, changes in the weather. But if you have a variety of crops, you create a more resilient system.
It's not just about the types of crop, it's also about the different ways we grow them.
Exactly. Another lesson from nature is about cooperation. Plants don't just exist on their own. They have all these relationships with other organisms, like the microbes in the soil that help them get nutrients, or the pollinators that help them reproduce.
It's like this whole underground network of teamwork and support.
Exactly. And we can learn from that in agriculture, too. If we encourage those beneficial relationships between plants, animals, and microorganisms, we can create more balanced and productive systems.
It's about shifting our mindset from competition to cooperation, recognizing that everything is connected.
Well said. And then there's this fascinating thing about plants, their ability to adapt. Over time, they've developed all these strategies to deal with drought, heat, cold, even that salinity we were talking about earlier.
They have a built-in survival kit.
Right. And that's something we can use in agriculture. By studying how plants have adapted, we can develop crops that are better suited to, a changing climate. Crops that can handle things like drought and salinity better.
It's like taking notes from nature's own R&D department.
I like that.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of innovation, it brings us back to one of the main themes of our deep dive today. The importance of innovation in agriculture.
Yeah, we can't just keep doing things the way they've
Yeah.
always been done, right? We have to keep exploring new ideas, experimenting, pushing the boundaries.
Absolutely. And those innovations can come from anywhere. High-tech labs working on genetically modified crops, small farmers trying out traditional techniques, it's all important.
It's like a global brainstorming session, trying to figure out how to feed everyone while protecting the planet.
And that leads to a final question for our listeners. What role do you see yourself playing in all of this?
Ooh, I like that. It's a call to action, a challenge to get involved in the food system in a meaningful way.
Exactly. Whether it's buying local produce, supporting sustainable farming, or even just learning more about where your food comes from, every little bit helps.
It's about realizing we're not just passive consumers. We have the power to shape the future of food and agriculture.
And that's a powerful thing, because the choices we make, even the small ones, have an impact on the whole system.
So let's make good choices, sustainable choices, choices that nourish us and the planet for today and for the future.
Well said. And on that note, we've come to the end of our deep dive into the world of fodder crops. We've covered a lot of ground, from the challenges of those problematic soils to the incredible innovations happening in agriculture. And we've explored how interconnected our food systems are with the environment and with the choices we make every day.
It's been an amazing journey. I hope our listeners have a new appreciation for fodder crops, those unsung heroes that help feed the world.
And maybe even some inspiration to help create a more sustainable and nourishing future for everyone.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.